The blood on Kyle's hands was not his own, and that was the only thing that told him he was still alive. He stood in the wreckage of a colony transport ship, the metal walls torn open like paper, sparks falling from broken wires above him. Smoke curled through the corridor in thin gray ribbons. Somewhere behind him, 3 bodies lay still. He did not look back at them. He never did. His name was Kale Ashen Voss, and he was the last active hunter in a program that most of the galaxy pretended did not exist. The comm in his ear crackled. "Target confirmed in Sector 9, said a flat mechanical voice. "Category 9 fugitive. Do not engage without full lethal protocol." Kale did not answer. He never wasted words on machines. He moved through the corridor with slow, careful steps, his rifle low but ready. The ship groaned around him, dying in pieces. This had once been a home for 400 human colonists. Now it was a grave, and somewhere inside it hid the thing that had made it one. The file on his wrist display showed a creature with black eyes and claws long enough to open a man from throat to stomach. It had killed an entire settlement in under 6 hours. The report called it merciless, efficient, without conscience. Kyle had read 100 reports like this one. He no longer flinched at the words. He found the trail at the end of the corridor, drops of dark blood leading toward an escape pod bay. He followed it, his boots silent on the metal floor, his breathing even and slow, the way the Corps had trained him since he was young enough to still cry at night. He did not remember when he stopped crying. That part of him had been taken out a long time ago, the same way surgeons remove a damaged organ. Clean, efficient, necessary, they had told him. The escape pod bay was small, dark, lit only by a single flickering emergency light. Kale raised his rifle as he stepped inside, and stopped. In the corner of the room, pressed against the wall with her knees pulled to her chest, was not the creature from the file. It was small, thin. Its skin was pale gray, its eyes large and dark, but there was nothing merciless in them. There was only fear. A long gash ran down one arm, still bleeding. Its body trembled with each breath. Kyle's finger rested against the trigger. His mission was clear. Kill the fugitive. Confirm the kill. Return to base. But something in his chest, something old and buried, refused to move. "Please," the creature whispered. Kyle froze. It was not the word itself that stopped him. Hunters were trained to ignore pleading. Pleading was noise, nothing more. A trick some targets used to buy themselves seconds they did not deserve. It was the language. The creature had spoken in human words, not translated, not broken. Perfect, soft, human words, spoken with a voice that cracked with pain. "Please don't," it said again. "I didn't kill them. I tried to save them." Kale's rifle did not lower, but his hand, steady through 100 kills, began to shake. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "My name is Vera," the creature said. "I am not what you think I am." Kyle studied her, because now, looking closer, he was certain it was a her, something in the shape of her face, the softness beneath the fear, and he saw no claws long enough to open a man from throat to stomach. He saw thin fingers, trembling, empty of any weapon. "The report says you killed 400 people, Kyle said. "The report is wrong," Vera said. "There is something else on this ship. Something that wears many shapes. It killed them. It let you find me instead." Kyle's mind, trained to trust evidence and nothing else, told him this was exactly what a target would say. A lie built to survive one more minute. But then Vera said something that no target, no fugitive, no enemy of humanity had ever said to him before. She said his mother's name. "Elin Voss," Vera whispered. "She is why I came here. She is why I know your name, Kale." The rifle in Kale's hands dropped an inch. The world around him seemed to grow very quiet, the smoke and sparks and dying ship fading into the background, replaced by a memory he had buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it never existed. A woman with dark hair, humming a quiet song, tucking a blanket around a small boy who could not sleep. He had not heard his mother's name spoken aloud in over 20 years. How do you know that name? Kale said, and his voice was no longer the voice of a hunter. It was smaller, younger, afraid. Before Vera could answer, the ship shuddered violently, throwing sparks across the room. Footsteps echoed from the corridor behind him, fast, coordinated, many of them. Reinforcements. Kyle turned toward the door as 3 figures in black hunter armor stepped into the room, weapons already raised, eyes glowing faintly behind dark visors. "Target acquired," one of them said, voice flat and mechanical, just like the comm in Kale's ear. "Step aside, Voss. We will complete the kill." Kale did not move. "She is not the fugitive," he said. The lead hunter tilted his head, a small, curious motion, the kind a machine makes when processing something unexpected. "Command has authorized full lethal protocol on this target. Compliance is not optional, Voss." Kyle looked back at Vera, who stared at him with wide, terrified eyes, blood still dripping slowly from the wound on her arm. She said nothing more. She did not need to. She simply waited, the way something waits when it has already accepted that it might die, and has chosen, at the very end, to hope anyway. Kale thought of his mother's name in a stranger's mouth. He thought of 20 years of silence, of missions completed without question, of a life built entirely on following orders because questions had once cost him everything. He thought of the small boy who used to cry at night, before the Corps taught him not to. "No," Kyle said. The word left his mouth quiet, but it landed in the room like a gunshot. The lead hunter's weapon shifted, aiming now not at Vera but at Kale. "You are in violation of direct orders," the hunter said. "Stand down, Voss, or you will be treated as a secondary target." Kale's grip tightened on his rifle. Every instinct trained into him for 20 years screamed at him to obey, to step aside, to let the mission finish the way missions always finished. But beneath that training, in a place the Corps had never fully reached, something older and more stubborn refused to yield. "Come and take her, then," Kale said. The lead hunter's finger moved on the trigger, and the room exploded into gunfire. The first shot missed Kale's head by less than an inch, close enough that he felt the heat of it against his cheek before he even registered the sound. He moved without thinking. 20 years of training took over where his mind had gone silent, and his body reacted the way it had been built to react. Fast, brutal, precise. He dropped low, swept his rifle across the legs of the nearest hunter, and fired twice before the man's armored knees even hit the ground. The room filled with noise, sparks, screaming metal, the sharp, ugly sound of weapons fire bouncing off every wall. "Get down!" Kale shouted at Vera, and for once she listened without question, pressing herself flat against the corner of the room as bolts of light tore through the space where she had been sitting seconds before. Kale had trained his entire life to fight exactly this kind of enemy, because the Corps had trained him to fight everyone eventually, even its own. He ducked behind a support beam as return fire chewed through the metal above his head, then rolled out and put 2 shots into the second hunter's shoulder joint, disabling the arm before it could aim. The third hunter, smarter than the others, retreated toward the doorway, calling for backup on an open channel. "Voss has gone rogue. Repeat, Voss has gone rogue. Requesting immediate." Kale's shot silenced the transmission before it finished. The hunter dropped, and the room went quiet except for the low hum of dying machinery and Vera's ragged breathing behind him. Kale stood there for a long moment, rifle still raised, chest rising and falling hard. He had just killed 3 of his own. 3 men he had trained beside, eaten beside, buried friends beside. The Corps did not forgive that. The Corps did not forgive anything. "We have to move," Vera said quietly, pulling herself upright, one hand pressed against her bleeding arm. Kale turned to look at her, and for the first time since the mission began, he let himself ask the question that mattered most. "Why do you know my mother's name?" Vera hesitated. "Not here," she said. "Please, there isn't time." He wanted to argue. Every part of his training told him to demand answers now, to use whatever force necessary to get them. But he had already broken every rule that mattered tonight, and something about the fear in her eyes told him that whatever she was hiding, she was more afraid of it than she was of him. They ran. Kyle led her through the dying ship, past the bodies of colonists he had failed to save, past shattered viewports showing the cold dark of space outside. He found a maintenance shuttle still intact near the lower decks, forced the door open, and pulled Vera inside just as the transport ship's hull began to groan under the strain of a structural collapse. The shuttle launched seconds before the section behind them tore open and spilled into vacuum. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Cale flew in silence, guiding the small ship away from the wreckage, his mind circling the same questions over and over with no answers to fill them. It was Vera who finally broke the silence. "Your mother saved my people once," she said. "A long time ago, before the war between your species and mine ever began." Kyle's hands tightened on the controls. "My mother was a scientist. She worked for the Coalition. She died when I was a child." "She did more than science," Vera said. "She gave something to my people, something that was never meant to be found again." Before Cale could press further, the comm panel on the shuttle flickered to life, cutting through the static with a voice he had not heard in years. A voice that had once told him bedtime stories were a weakness, and duty was the only thing worth loving. "Kyle," the voice said. "It's Sorai." Kyle's jaw tightened. Director Sorai Lin, his former handler. The woman who had rebuilt him piece by piece into the hunter he had become. "You're not authorized to use this channel," Cale said. "I built that channel," Sorai answered. "I can use it however I want." "3 of your men are dead," Cale said. "I imagine you already know that." There was a pause on the line, long enough that Cale almost thought the connection had failed. "I know," Sorai said finally, "and I know why. Kyle, listen to me very carefully. What you are protecting is not what you think it is. This mission was never about a fugitive." Kyle glanced at Vera, who sat very still, watching him with an expression he could not read. "Then what is it about?" Kyle asked. "It's about a mistake I made 20 years ago," Sorai said, "and one I'm not willing to let you pay for again." Kyle's mind flashed back to fragments he had never allowed himself to examine too closely. A lab, a fire, his mother's voice calling his name through smoke. A Coalition ship pulling away from a burning research station, while a much younger version of himself screamed to go back. The Corps had told him grief made him weak, so he had learned, slowly and painfully, to stop feeling it, to stop asking why. "Tell me what happened to her," Cale said. "Tell me what my mother did." "I can't," Sorai said. "Not over an open channel. Not with the Syndral Combine listening on every frequency in this sector." "The Syndral Combine," Cale repeated. He knew the name. Everyone in Coalition space knew the name. A powerful alien empire that had fought on the winning side of the old war against humanity, and never fully trusted the peace that followed. What does an alien empire want with a scared kid hiding in an escape pod? "She's not a kid," Sorai said. "And she isn't hiding from us." The shuttle's proximity sensor let out a sharp, urgent chime. Cale's eyes snapped to the display. 3 unidentified warships had dropped out of hyperspace less than 200 kilometers away, their silhouettes sharp and alien against the stars, long, curved hulls unlike anything in Coalition design. "Cale," Sorai said, her voice suddenly tight with fear. "Get her out of there. Now. If the Syndral reach her before I do, everything I tried to protect 20 years ago will have been for nothing." Vera's hand closed around Cale's arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "She's telling the truth about one thing," Vera said quietly. "I'm not the fugitive, Cale." On the comm, Soray's voice cut through one final time before the channel dissolved into static, the alien warships already beginning to move. "She's not the fugitive," Sorai said. "You are." The words hit Cale harder than any bullet ever had. "That's not possible," he said, though even as he spoke, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. The kind of feeling that comes when a lie you have lived inside your whole life begins to crack open. The comm channel was already dead. Soray's voice swallowed by static, the alien warships closing fast on their small, unshielded shuttle. Kale had no time to sit with the words she had left behind. He shoved the controls forward, angling the shuttle hard toward a nearby asteroid field, hoping the scattered rock and debris would buy them cover. "Hold on to something," he told Vera. She braced herself against the wall as the shuttle shuddered, weaving between tumbling stone the size of buildings. Alarm screaming as sensors detected weapons locking on from behind. "They're gaining," Vera said, her voice tight but steady. For someone who had been trembling with fear only an hour earlier, she had settled into something calmer now, something almost practiced. Kyle noticed it, filed it away, and said nothing. A shot from the pursuing warships clipped the shuttle's rear stabilizer, sending them into a violent spin. Kyle fought the controls, gritting his teeth, until the ship steadied just long enough to slip between two massive asteroids, breaking the enemy's weapons lock for a few precious seconds. It was enough time for something small and fast to drop out of the field ahead of them. A battered transport ship, its hull scarred with old weld marks and mismatched plating, clearly built more for surviving trouble than avoiding it. A voice crackled over an open frequency, rough and unimpressed. "You two look like you could use a hiding spot." "Depends who's offering," Kale said. "Name's Rook," the voice said. "And unless you'd rather get chewed up by Syndral warships, I'd suggest you dock now and argue about trust later." Kale glanced at Vera. She nodded once. He guided the shuttle into the battered ship's cargo bay, just as the warships opened fire on the space they had occupied seconds before. Inside, Rook turned out to be an older man, gray-haired, weathered, with the kind of eyes that had clearly seen more war than peace. He looked at Kale's hunter armor and let out a low whistle. "A core ghost," Rook said. "Haven't seen one of you outside a nightmare in years." "You have a problem with the core?" Kale asked. "I have a problem with everyone who ever wore that uniform," Rook said. "But it looks like you're currently being shot at by the same people I usually avoid, so I'll make an exception today." He led them through the ship as it jumped into hyperspace, the stars outside stretching into long streaks of light. Vera sat quietly in the corner of the small common room, holding her wounded arm, watching Kale with an expression that mixed guilt and something like hope. "You said my mother saved your people," Kyle said finally, once the adrenaline had begun to fade. "Start there. All of it." Vera took a slow breath. "My people are called the Threnai. Long before your war with the Coalition's enemies, before humanity became what it is now, my people made contact with a small group of human scientists. Your mother was one of them." "Contact for what?" Kyle asked. "Observation," Vera said. "We wanted to understand your species. Humanity was young then, reckless, brilliant, nothing like us. We had never seen a species behave the way you did, refusing to accept defeat, refusing to accept limits, choosing to fight even when every calculation said you should surrender." Rook, listening from the pilot's seat, let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's one way to put it," he muttered. "During that time," Vera continued, "something happened. Something that terrified every species watching. Your mother was there when it happened. She recorded it. And when the war began years later, my people believed that record was the only thing standing between total peace and total annihilation." Kyle's jaw tightened. "What did she record?" "I don't know the full truth," Vera admitted. "I was never told. I was only told to protect what she gave us, and to bring it back to a Voss if anything ever threatened it." "Protect what?" Kyle asked. Before Vera could answer, her body convulsed suddenly, a sharp gasp escaping her lips as she doubled over, clutching at her spine. "Vera!" Kyle was at her side in an instant, catching her before she collapsed to the floor. Beneath the collar of her torn clothing, faint lines of light began to glow along her back, tracing intricate patterns beneath her skin, pulsing in slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat that did not belong to flesh. Rook abandoned the controls and crouched beside them, staring at the glowing lines with wide eyes. "That's not alien tech," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I've hauled enough black market cargo to know Coalition manufacturing when I see it. That's human tech. That's old human tech. Pre-war." Kyle stared at the pulsing lines beneath Vera's skin, his mind racing back to fragments of memory he had spent 20 years trying to forget. A lab full of humming machines, his mother's hands moving quickly over a console, a phrase she used to whisper to him at night that he had never understood until now. Whatever we build, so we never have to lose you again. That shouldn't exist, Rook said, backing away slightly. Whatever that is, it's not supposed to be walking around inside some alien girl 100 years after your war ended. Vera's breathing slowed, the glow beneath her skin fading as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving her pale and exhausted in Kyle's arms. What is inside you? Kyle asked quietly. That made my mother send you to find me. Vera looked up at him, her dark eyes heavy with something between fear and grief. I don't know everything, she whispered. But I know this. It's the reason the Syndrel Combine wants me dead, and it's the reason the Coalition wants me erased. Rook straightened slowly, glancing toward the cockpit as the ship's sensors let out a low, urgent tone. Well, he said grimly, you'll have time to figure the rest out later, because we've got company. On the display, 3 new warships had dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, and this time, they were not Syndrel. They bore the unmistakable insignia of the Coalition's Black Ops fleet. Rook's hands moved fast over the controls, cutting power to every non-essential system, dropping the ship into a silent drift among a scatter of nearby debris. Black Ops fleet, he muttered. Wonderful. As if Syndrel warships weren't bad enough. Kale stared at the 3 ships on the display, dark and sleek, unmarked except for a small insignia he recognized instantly, an insignia he had once worn on his own shoulder without question. They're not here for a fight, Kale said quietly. Not yet. If they wanted us dead, they wouldn't be broadcasting an open channel. As if to prove him right, the comm crackled to life. Kyle, Soray's voice said, softer now, almost pleading. I know you're out there. Please. Let me talk to you before anyone else does something we can't take back. Rook glanced at Kyle. Your call. Kale hesitated only a moment before opening the channel. I'm listening. Not like this, Sarai said. Face to face. I'm alone on my ship, no weapons armed, no backup beyond what's already visible. You have my word. Your word hasn't meant much to me in years, Kale said. There was a pause, heavy with something that sounded almost like shame. I know, Sorey said. But this isn't about the core anymore. This is about your mother. And I think you deserve to hear the truth from someone who was actually there. Kale looked at Vera, still pale from her earlier collapse, and then at Rook, who shrugged. Your funeral, Rook said. Figuratively, hopefully. They docked with Soray's ship under tense silence, weapons ready, trust nowhere in sight. Soray met them alone in a small briefing room, exactly as promised. No guards, no restraints, just an older woman with tired eyes and gray threading through her once dark hair. You've gotten taller, Soray said quietly, looking at Kale the way someone looks at a memory they never expected to see standing in front of them again. Cut the sentiment, Kale said. Tell me about my mother. Soray exhaled slowly and gestured for them to sit. Vera remained standing near the door, watchful, while Rook leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Your mother's name was Elin Voss, Soray began. She was one of the lead scientists on a classified program called Project Chrysalis. Kale's chest tightened at the word. Somewhere deep in his memory, buried under years of conditioning, that word stirred something old and painful. During the war, Soray continued, humanity was losing, badly. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and every calculation the Coalition's alien allies ran told them the war was already over. But humans have never been good at accepting a war is over. Get to the point, Kale said. Project Chrysalis wasn't built to win battles, Soray said. It was built as a last resort. A fail-safe designed to activate only if humanity faced total extinction. Your mother helped design its core. She believed we needed something to protect our species when nothing else could. What does it do? Kyle asked. Sorai's eyes flickered toward Vera before returning to Kale. It grants an extraordinary, uncontrollable surge of power to whoever carries it. Enough to turn the tide of any battle, at any cost. It was never meant to be used unless we had absolutely nothing left to lose. The room went quiet. And it worked, Sorai said. During the final battle of the war, Chrysalis was activated. What happened next is still classified above my clearance, but I know this much. Every species watching that battle came away terrified of what humanity was capable of when truly cornered. That's why the war ended. Not because we won cleanly, because we proved we would rather destroy everything, including ourselves, than lose. Kyle's mind reeled, fragments of memory rising to the surface faster now. A bright flash of light through smoke, his mother's voice screaming his name, the coalition ship pulling away without her. She died in that battle, Kyle said quietly. It wasn't a question. She died protecting something more important than the weapon itself, Sorai said. Before the final battle, your mother made a choice the coalition never approved. She believed Chrysalis was too dangerous to remain a weapon at all, so she altered its core, hid its true purpose, and gave a piece of it to the only people she trusted outside the coalition, the Threnai. All eyes turned toward Vera. She placed it in me, Vera said quietly, when I was very young. My people have protected it ever since, waiting for the day someone with your mother's blood would come looking for it. Not to use it as a weapon, but to finish what she started. Kyle stared at Vera, his chest tight with something he did not have a name for. Grief, anger, disbelief, and beneath all of it, a fragile, painful thread of hope. Why now? Kale asked. Why send her to me now after all these years? Sorai's expression darkened. Because the Coalition Council recently discovered that Chrysalis still exists, hidden somewhere outside their control. They've spent years trying to erase every trace of the project, terrified of what would happen if the galaxy ever learned humanity still possessed something capable of that kind of power. If they find Vera before we do, they won't just take the core. They'll make sure nothing about her ever surfaces again. And if the Syndral find her first? Rook asked. Then they'll finish the war they never truly won, Sorai said grimly. Either way, Vera doesn't survive unless someone stops both sides from reaching her. Kyle looked at Vera, seeing her now not as a fugitive, not as a stranger, but as the last living piece of the mother he had spent 20 years trying to forget. I begged them not to send you on this mission, Sorai said quietly, her voice cracking with something raw and unguarded. Not this one. Not after what happened to your mother, Kale. I couldn't lose you the same way I lost her. Before Kale could respond, an alarm blared through the ship, red emergency lights flooding the small room. We've been boarded, Rook said sharply, already moving toward the door. Sorai's eyes widened. That's not possible. This ship is shielded, it's... The wall behind her exploded inward, and armored Syndral soldiers poured through the breach, weapons raised. Sorai moved on instinct, throwing herself between the soldiers and Vera as the first shot fired. She took the blast meant for Kale. Sorai hit the floor hard, a scorched wound smoking across her shoulder, and for one terrible second Kale thought she was dead. Then she groaned, alive, furious, dragging herself behind an overturned console as the room dissolved into chaos. Move! Rook shouted, already dragging Vera toward the door as more Syndral soldiers pushed through the breach, their weapons lighting the smoke-filled room with sharp flashes of blue light. Kale did not think. He acted, the way 20 years of training had built him to act, throwing himself between the soldiers and the others, firing in short, precise bursts that dropped 2 attackers before they even finished raising their weapons. Kale, help me, Sorai gasped, clutching her shoulder as she tried to stand. He pulled her up with one arm, keeping his rifle steady with the other, and half-carried her toward the corridor where Rook and Vera were already fighting their way through a second wave of soldiers. There's too many, Rook shouted over the gunfire. We need another way out. The maintenance shuttle, Kyle said, 2 decks down. They moved fast, Sorai leaning heavily on Kale's shoulder. Vera staying close behind Rook as he cleared a path with brutal, efficient shots that betrayed a military past he had clearly never mentioned. The ship shuddered around them, weapons fire tearing through bulkheads, alarms screaming in every direction. "You're better with that rifle than a smuggler should be," Kyle said as they ducked around a corner. "I wasn't always a smuggler," Rook said grimly. "Ask me about it after we survive this." They reached the shuttle bay just as a squad of Syndral soldiers rounded the corridor behind them, weapons raised. "Get them inside," Kyle said, shoving Soray toward Vera. "I'll hold them off." "Absolutely not," Soray snapped, wincing as she straightened despite her wound. "I didn't survive 20 years of watching you throw yourself at impossible odds just to let you do it again without backup." Rook grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and tossed it to Soray without hesitation. "Then let's make this quick." What followed was chaos. Sharp, desperate, brutal fighting in a narrow corridor with nowhere to retreat. Kyle fought with the cold precision of a hunter, Soray with the disciplined fury of someone reclaiming a fight she never should have left, and Rook with the reckless, practiced skill of a man who had clearly done this before, in wars he never talked about. Vera pressed herself against the shuttle's hull, watching wide-eyed as 3 humans held back an entire squad of alien soldiers through sheer, stubborn refusal to fall. The last soldier dropped, and silence fell over the smoking corridor. "Inside," Kyle said, breathing hard. "Now." They scrambled into the shuttle as the ship shuddered again, this time from something far larger. The unmistakable groan of a hull beginning to break apart under sustained bombardment. "They're not just boarding anymore," Rook said, throwing the shuttle into launch sequence. "They're trying to destroy the whole ship." The shuttle tore free just as Soray's vessel erupted behind them in a violent bloom of fire and debris, forcing Rook to throw the small craft into a desperate spiral to avoid the blast. When the chaos finally settled, they drifted in silence, alone in the dark, breathing hard, alive. Soray, pale and bleeding but stubbornly upright, looked at Kale with something like grim resolve. "They won't stop," she said. "Not the Syndral, not the Coalition Council. As long as Vera carries that core, both sides will tear the galaxy apart trying to reach her." "Then we destroy it," Rook said. "Simple as that. No core. No reason to hunt her." "It's not that simple," Vera said quietly. "The core isn't just a weapon anymore. It's part of me. Removing it would kill me." The shuttle fell silent. Kale looked at Vera, then at Soray, then at his own hands, still trembling faintly from the fight. Everything he had been trained to believe told him the mission was simple: protect the asset, complete the objective, follow the chain of command. But nothing about this had been simple since the moment Vera whispered his mother's name in a dying escape pod. "There has to be another option," Kale said. "There might be," Soray said slowly. "Your mother didn't just hide Chrysalis, Kale. Before she died, she left behind partial research, locked away, buried deep in Coalition archives, protected by clearance levels so high most of the Council doesn't even know it exists. I've spent years trying to access it, hoping it might explain what she truly intended for the Core's final purpose." "You think it could save her," Kale said, nodding toward Vera, "without turning her into a weapon." "I think your mother designed Chrysalis to be more than destruction," Soray said. "I think she was trying to give humanity something it never had before. Not power to conquer, but power to protect, shared freely without cost." Rook let out a low whistle. "That's a nice theory. Doesn't help us if the archive is locked behind Coalition clearance we don't have." "It doesn't need Coalition clearance," Soray said. "It needs Voss clearance, biological. Only someone of Elan's bloodline can access it." All eyes turned to Kale. He stared back at them, the weight of 2 decades of buried grief and unanswered questions pressing down on him harder than any mission ever had. "Where is it?" Kale asked quietly. "An abandoned Coalition research station," Soray said. "The same one where your mother died." The shuttle's sensors chimed sharply, cutting through the tense silence. Rook checked the display and went pale. "We've got a problem," he said. "Multiple contacts, closing fast. Syndral and Coalition both, and from the look of their formation, they're not fighting each other anymore." Soray leaned over the display, her expression grim. "They've called a temporary truce," she said, "which means both sides have finally realized the same thing." "What's that?" Cale asked. Sarai looked up at him, her eyes hard with certainty. "That the only way either of them wins," she said, "is if they stop hunting each other and start hunting you together." Cale's hand tightened around the shuttle's controls, his mother's unfinished legacy waiting somewhere ahead of them in the dark, and an entire galaxy closing in behind. He looked at Vera, then at the growing swarm of enemy ships on the display, and made his choice. "Then we'd better move faster than both of them combined," Cale said, and pushed the shuttle into a hard burn toward the one place that held every answer left to find. The research station drifted in the dark like a corpse that had never been buried, its hull scarred black in places, dead for 20 years but never fully forgotten. Kyle brought the shuttle in low, weaving through broken sections of the old structure while Rook watched the sensors, tracking the swarm of Syndril and Coalition ships closing in from behind. "We've got minutes, not hours," Rook said. "Whatever you're doing in there, do it fast." Cale docked the shuttle in a scarred landing bay and led the others through dark, silent corridors that had once been filled with the hum of machinery and his mother's voice. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead, casting long shadows across walls still marked with old scorch damage from the night everything had changed. He remembered none of it clearly, and all of it at once. "This way," Sarai said, guiding them deeper into the station, favoring her wounded shoulder. The archive was buried below the primary lab, shielded against everything except direct biological access. They reached a heavy door marked with a faded Coalition seal, long since stripped of power. Sarai pressed a small device against the panel beside it, and after a moment a single red light blinked to life. "It's still active," she said. "Barely. Kyle, it needs you." Kyle stepped forward and placed his palm against the scanner. For a long, tense moment nothing happened. Then a soft chime sounded and the door slid open with a groan of long unused machinery. Inside, a small chamber held a single console, dust-covered but intact, and a faded photograph pinned beside it. A woman with dark hair and tired eyes, holding a small boy who was laughing at something just out of frame. Kyle stared at the photograph for a long moment before Sarai gently touched his arm. "We don't have time," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Kyle nodded and activated the console. Lines of data scrolled across the screen and slowly, painfully, the truth his mother had hidden for 20 years began to unfold. Chrysalis had never been designed as a weapon at all in its final form. His mother had redesigned it in secret, terrified of what the original version had already proven capable of. She believed humanity's greatest trait was never its ability to destroy. It was its refusal to abandon what it loved, no matter the cost. So she built something new, a bond key, a way to share that same unbreakable resolve with anyone willing to stand beside humanity instead of against it, without ever tearing the galaxy apart to prove it. She had never finished it. She had died before the final activation sequence could be completed. Until now. "It needs a living bond between two people," Kyle read aloud, his voice tight with disbelief. "One who carries the core, and one of my mother's bloodline, willing to share it freely." He looked at Vera. "That's you," he said quietly. "And me." Before Vera could answer, the station shuddered violently, the sound of distant explosions rumbling through the corridors. "They've breached the outer hull," Rook shouted from the doorway. "Syndril and Coalition both. We're out of time." Sarai grabbed a weapon from the console room's old storage locker, her expression fierce despite her wound. "Do it," she said to Cale. "Whatever it is, do it now." Cale turned to Vera. "This might not work. It might hurt you. It might hurt both of us." "I've carried this alone for as long as I can remember," Vera said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I would rather try with you than keep running forever." Kyle nodded and reached out his hand. Vera took it. The moment their hands touched, the glowing lines beneath her skin surged to life, brighter than before, spreading now across Kale's arm as well, weaving between them like threads of light, binding two separate lives into one shared purpose. The console's screen flared, the final activation sequence his mother had written 20 years ago finally completing itself through her son. Outside, the first wave of soldiers burst into the corridor, weapons raised, and froze. Light spilled from the chamber, warm and steady, rolling outward through the station like a slow, unstoppable tide. Weapons across the battlefield flickered and died, not destroyed, simply stilled, as though something had reached out and gently pried every finger from every trigger at once. The soldiers stared, stunned as Kale and Vera stepped out of the light together, neither of them a weapon, neither of them a fugitive, simply two people who had chosen in the end to trust each other completely. The battlefield outside the station fell into a silence no one had ordered. Syndral commanders and coalition officers alike stood frozen at their stations, watching sensors that showed every weapon in range disabled without a single life lost. No one had won. No one had lost. Something else entirely had happened, and none of them fully understood it yet. In the days that followed, the Coalition Council was forced into an uncomfortable reckoning. The existence of Chrysalis could no longer be hidden, and neither could the truth of what Elin Voss had truly built. Not a weapon meant to end wars through fear, but a bond meant to end them through trust. Soray, recovering slowly from her wound, found herself reshaping the very institution she had once helped build, arguing before a skeptical council that humanity's reputation did not need to rest on fear any longer. Rook, never one for long goodbyes, eventually took his battered ship and left for open space once more, though not before telling Kale, with a rare and genuine smile, that he'd flown with worse company. And Vera, healed and steady beside Kale for the first time without fear shadowing her every breath, finally asked him the question that had followed them since the beginning. "What are you now?" she asked. "Not a hunter, not a soldier." Kale thought about it for a long moment, standing at the viewport of a quiet, repaired ship, stars spread endlessly before them. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But for the first time in 20 years, I'm not hunting alone." Behind them, Soray's voice came softly over the comm, carrying not orders this time, but an offer. "There are others like her out there," she said. "Pieces of what your mother tried to protect, scattered and hidden across a dozen systems. I can't order you to find them, Kale. Not anymore." Kale looked at Vera, then out at the stars stretching endlessly ahead of them, and smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "Good," he said, "because this time, I'm not asking permission." The ship turned toward the open dark, carrying forward not a weapon and not a hunter, but something humanity had almost forgotten it was capable of becoming. Hope, given a reason to stay.